Hi everyone. Yesterday I received my Flipper Zero in the mail, so I'm just going to be giving some initial impressions, some demonstrations, and then a brief review. I repackaged everything in the box so you can see what comes in it and what the experience is like. See Flipper Zero, electronic pet toy. Around back it shows all the different functions. Much there. You go and open it up. First you get a quick start guide, which walks you through updating firmware. If it ever freezes, there's a shortcut to reboot. Not much else than that. A nice little sticker. I do like that. And on top, you have USB Type-C cable. Then there's the flipper itself. So I pull this out, it's a little tight in there. Comes with a little protector telling you to hold the back button to turn it on. So I go ahead and do that. Oh, come on. And now it mentions I need an SD card. On the first boot, it'll have your flipper, your little character, do a little introduction, think Kickstarter backers, that kind of thing. And so I have my SD card over here, because it doesn't include one. You definitely need one. And try and get a brand name card. The cheaper ones might not support the spy mode that it needs. All data will be saved on SD card. And you can see it's sleeping right now. So open it up. You can see all the different menus. I'll start with the sub-gigahertz mode. So this lets you control basic RF electronics. So stuff like basic remote controlled gates. Certain RF relay switchers. They're just very general. In my case, I found that I can use it to control my ceiling fan. So if I click on that, you can see there's a few different options: read raw, saved, add manually, and frequency analyzer. And the frequency analyzer is pretty cool. So if I pull that up, sorry for the cut there, I wanted to grab my ceiling fan remote. So if I hit one of the buttons here, you can see it has to be pretty close, but it shows roughly 315 megahertz, which is correct. So if I go back here, under saved, I have a few different ceiling fan settings saved, and I will cut to a quick demonstration of turning the power on and off using it. So for actually sampling sub-gigahertz devices, there's read raw. If we go into read, this will try and scan a given frequency and modulation and try and decode it that way. You can give it the frequency. There's a few set ones for protocols that have been programmed in, a few different modulations, or you can have it hop between them. This has not worked for me yet. The read raw mode did, however. So this just takes a very basic sample of a signal instead. You go to config, you can give it a frequency that you've got, either using the frequency analyzer, or you can just use the FCC ID of that device and look it up. And then modulation, so if I set it to 315 on my ceiling fan remote, I go back here, I can hit record, and there's that. So then you can save that, give it a name, and it'll be added to your save book. And then if you go into saved, you can pick that, hit send, and it'll replicate it. So now I'll show that with the power button. Okay, so as you can see, that works pretty well. You can just go through any of these, send, rename them. Then if you go to add manually, you choose the encoding, give it a name, and that's it. So we go back one more. Once again, sorry for the cut there. If I go into RFID, there's read, saved, and add manually. So if we go to read, I've got a little fob here. You can see EM4100, hex all 7s, I set that in earlier. You can write that to a different tag, name and save it, or emulate it. So if I go into my saved here, I have a few different ones ready. It can do any of the three big T5577 emulation modes. So EM4100, HID Prox, and Andala. So if I go to this HID one, you can emulate it, write it, or edit it. If I write it, there we go. So if I go back to read, same one back. There we go. Sometimes finding the sweet spots on these little fobs can be a little hard. So you can see all that info there, and then the same options as before. If we try it with an implant here, there you go. See EM4100 set to that hex ID. That's the one that was in there originally. I don't use it for access control, so I haven't changed it, and I don't care about it because I can easily change it later. So same options there, and I can quickly write to an implant. So let's write, this one's preloaded with all 7s in EM4100 mode. It does do a verify check, that's why sometimes it can be a little slow. So you can see there, pretty easy. If I go back here, next is the NFC mode. So this is your high frequency 13.56 megahertz RFID. There's read card or run special action, saved cards, or add manually. If I go back here real quick, if I go to add manually, you can choose any of the three for LF, low frequency as well, and just manually type in the hex values. So if I pop into NFC, read card, run special action, save cards, or add manually. If I go to read card, you can see my exit light up a little bit there. And I'm going to blink this out in post since I do use this for authentication. But it does read pretty easy. And I can also show with a little Gen 1A My Fair Magic card. That reads pretty easy. Currently there is no option to write UIDs, which I'd like to see. But I'm sure that'll come up in the firmware later if the hardware supports it. If I go into saved cards, you can see I've got a few different ones saved, and with those you can just emulate those or edit them. You got info, I'll blank that out as well, but it gives you some useful info. Under special action, there's read bank card and read my for ultra / ntag or ultralight. So if I pull that up, that's another use case for these. See my for ultralight. This is actually an ntag I2C plus, but it has similar read modes, I believe. Here's a demo of the NFC Emulation Modes. So this is my homemade RFID safe. If I pull up NFC here, it does not like the exposure on the screen there. I can go down to saved cards, and I'll choose my exit since that's programmed into this emulate. And you can hear the relay click, and there we go, it unlocks. And now it's locked back, it doesn't work. And it'll just keep emulating for as long as you'd want. Next is infrared. I can't demonstrate this one too well, but I can at least pull it up here. Universal library. So the idea for this is that it would just go through every single common code for each of these buttons. So if you have a TV in public you're wanting to mess around with, that would work for those. But there's not many codes in yet. The only one that worked for mine was the power button. If I hit one of these, you can see it goes by super quick. But if I hit that one, it's much, much slower because there's a lot more codes saved for power. We can do learn to remote or saved remotes. So you can see I have one in here for my TV, volume up, volume down, and mute. And so if I actually grab, this is my Google TV remote, but it has IR. I can go to add here. And it's just that easy. And you can save it, name it, and it'll be added to that remote. So very easy to use, and it's supported just about every infrared remote that I've tried, which is nice. So up here, I didn't give a general overview of the device itself. There's the GPIO pins, including serial. This is both male and female iButton, so it can emulate an iButton, or it can take them in to clone. SD card slot, little lanyard, wristband loop, USB-C port, infrared there. That's about it. So under GPIO, there's USB UART bridge, GPIO manual control, and 5 volts on GPIO. So you can see normally that's disabled, but you can turn it on there. Under manual control, this lets you go pin by pin for some of these and turn them on or off. I can offer a demonstration of that in a moment. Just a quick demonstration of this. I have it set to PC3. So you can see C3 there. I just have an LED connected. Whenever I press a button, it lights up. And then lastly, USB UART bridge. So that lets you plug into the transmit and receive pins there and connect it to a laptop or other computer via USB. And just connect into it as a serial port. And I have tested that, and that does work. You can config what USB channel it uses, what baud rate. So if you have to manually configure it, that's handy. You can actually change the pins, which is pretty neat. I haven't seen that much before in these kind of devices. Yeah, so pretty handy. Just nice to have. And I'll give a demonstration of that as well in a moment. I'll cut to it now. So a basic demonstration of the USB UART bridge mode. All I've done is I've used some wire to connect them together to form a loopback. So if I go on here, I can just use PicoCom, connect to it just as a USB serial port. Now as I type, you can see it shows up here. So it's feeding the loopback correctly, and as I type, you can see it lists both 1 byte transmitted and 1 byte received for every press. So next is iButton. Sadly, I can't demonstrate this one. I left my only iButton at my other residence. You can read, they're saved, and then you can add manually. Choose any of the 3 modes, and then put in the key. So that should be pretty easy to use as well. Bad USB. So this emulates a USB rubber ducky, and it can actually read ducky script files off of that SD card. So you can see there's 2 demos pre-included, one for Mac and one for Windows, where it just types out a little document with some ASCII art, and then I wrote a little test one that I'll show off later. Here's a quick demo of the bad USB mode on the flipper. So I have it plugged into my MacBook here. So I go ahead and go to it. I'll first start, so you can see it's already entered HID mode. The Mac ones will pull up the keyboard setup assistant. But if I go ahead and run this demo script here, see it gets ready and I can hit run. Opens up a terminal. I will say by default the delays are quite conservative, so it ends up a little slower than it can be on typing output. You can see it's doing some ASCII art. And that's the gist of the demo script. So if I go back here, then I open up the one I wrote, I can run it. You can see here, it writes out the same ASCII art because I'm uninventive, and I decided to leave most of their demo in as well, but I sped it up a bit. So you can see all that happened right there is I wrote a bash script, outputted it to a file, made it executable, and then ran it. And it ran a tree through my home directory, and then of course it hit macOS permissions. But you can start to see some of the potential there of different scripts, especially with the Windows version. You could do quite a lot. Looking at the actual script, Ducky script is incredibly basic. So rem, these are your comments, so they're non-functional. Just delay, and then the number of milliseconds. GUI space to open up Spotlight. GUI being the Windows key, or in this case, the command key. Delay, and then string just types out entire, anything from one character to an entire line. Enter. It's very, very easy, and you can just search and find every keyword that you'd want to use. U2F, so this is your universal second factor authentication. So I click on that, it just says connect to a computer, and it works essentially the same as a YubiKey. And I have tested that, and that works as well. I was able to connect to my Google account. Here's a demo of the universal two-factor functionality of the flipper. So if I pull it up here, you can see I'm about to sign into my Google account. I go ahead and do that. Do you want to sign in using security key? Insert your security key and activate it. So I go down to U2F. Say press OK to authenticate. There we go. And that works. Plugins. So the idea for this is that in the future we'll be able to put applications on the SD card. And you just select them through here. That way you don't have to update the firmware every time. At the moment that's not functional, but this is a little demo of the plugin system. So there's Bluetooth remote, so the idea is you can connect it to a computer over Bluetooth and then use it to control like a PowerPoint. Music player, so this just plays a little tune over the speaker, which is neat. And then Snake Game, it's about what you'd expect. If I go next is just settings. So you have your Bluetooth on or off, and that's primarily used for the companion apps, which I'll show off in a moment as well. LCD notifications. So you have backlight brightness, backlight time, LED brightness, volume, and vibration. So I have it turned down. Normally it can be pretty loud. Under storage, you can see only 200 kilobytes of internal storage. And that is my flipper's name, Abic Vice, I guess. And those are burned in from the factory. They act as your serial number. About SD card. It formats an exFAT, which is interesting. This is a 64 gig card, way more than I'd ever need, but it's the only name brand card I had around. The no-name ones I had some issues. Format, benchmark, or factory reset your device. There's power, battery info, reboot, power off. So you can see 16 milliamps right now, 99% charge, temperature is 28°C, voltage, and health. Desktop. So this is whenever your flipper's in kind of the like pre-main menu. You can set a favorite app to have quick access to, and then you can set up a pin, and I'll show that a bit more in a second. Passport. So it's kind of like a Tamagotchi. You've got your flipper, it has a mood, your level, and that should level up as you learn more IR codes, emulate more tags, that kind of thing. Under system, log level, and debug mode. And then under about, nothing too interesting, just compliance stuff for the most part. And then firmware info. One thing I haven't gone over, you will have to immediately connect it and update the firmware. The version on these is fairly old and missing a lot of features. But that's pretty easy to do. There's a piece of desktop software for Linux, Windows, and Mac called QFlipper. And it worked quite well in my testing. The Windows version has a few issues. You need to use Zodig to fix the serial driver. But it works fine. Or the USB driver. So if I go back to kind of the main menu, it does these kind of idle animations. If I hit down, there's my favorites, so that lets me get right into that sub-gigahertz replay. If I go to the left, there's a browser. So this is my SD card file system, so I can go to bad USB, for instance, pick these, run an app, delete, pin. Kind of nice to be able to get quick access to stuff. Universal two-factor, pull that up. Bad USB, I button, and it just lets you kind of manually go through a lot of quick access. And then if I hit up there, there's lock, set pin, and dumb mode. Dumb mode isn't implemented yet, but I believe the idea of that it will make it look essentially like a Tamagotchi. It'll disable all of the hacking pen testing functions. If you go to set pin, you just give a different arrangement of arrows. I won't do that right now because I don't want one. You can lock it, and this is like a hold switch mode, so you just press back 3 times and it's unlocked. And then since I have 125 kilohertz RFID as my favorite app, the left arrow just brings me right into it, which is nice. Alright, so now that I've gone through everything, what are my thoughts? For the most part, very positive. I was lucky enough to get mine fairly early in the grand scheme, despite being a pre-order, not a Kickstarter backer. So far, the software seems relatively stable. I've had a few minor crashes, but it reboots very quickly. Out of the features that they advertised, there's still a few missing, namely being able to run Arduino sketches using the GPIO pins. That's not complete. There was one mode that was talked about where flippers could talk to each other over the sub-gigahertz mode. That hasn't been implemented. As mentioned, there's no changing UIDs for high-frequency cards, which that's the main thing that's missing that I would really like to see. Sub-gigahertz mode, there's a lot more protocols that need to be implemented, but that's happening slowly, and it's all open source on GitHub, so anyone can contribute. But for managing access control cards, it is much, much easier and more accessible than something like a Proxmark. Proxmarks are fantastic, and you will need them. Well, I say plural. You'll need at least one to do a lot of complex RFID just work in general. So if your implant ever gets bricked, in my case, T5577s don't have tear protection, so if I were to accidentally move it while it was writing, that could cause it to get bricked, and I'd have to use this to slowly restore it. There's some other emulation modes that the T5577 can do that aren't included in the flipper. The flipper can't do, I think it's FDX B or A, which is what's used for pet tags, even though the hardware should, in theory, be able to support it. But for the general user, who might want to clone their work badge to their implant, this would be a fantastic way to do that. And especially if you have, multiple things that you might want on your implant. So if you go to a hotel, right, you're not always going to be having a Proxmark on you. And this would let me really quickly scan my card, clone it, and there we go for the weekend or whatever. I think it's a fantastic hardware platform that has a lot of room to grow, and it has a lot of charm as is. The company seems to be trying their best with responding to basic issues people are having, both with just the logistics of getting their order as well as the device itself. As I mentioned, they're working on fixing the Windows version of QFlipper. They've investigated on the Discord a few different problems people have had. So I do have a lot of faith that this device is going to be supported, and since all the software is open source, in theory, it could always be forked and worked on from there. So overall, very positive thoughts. I look forward to seeing it expand, and I look forward to bringing this basically everywhere with me and seeing what I can do.